Let's take a look at the paradigm for verbals. Now, as I've mentioned, clauses are usually made up of combinations of nominals and verbals. Sometimes you do have verbless clauses, which simply say something like God good, which should be glossed like God is good. But usually a clause will have a verbal. If you remember, I was using the analogy of a star and its sort of planetary orbits, and so you would have these kind of satellites revolving around a star or a primary. And so the verbal is like the star, and the nominal phrases are like the satellites. And all together, this makes up a clause. Now, you could get rid of some of these, so you can remove some of the nominal clusters or nominal groups, and it just makes a smaller clause. And the interesting thing about Greek is you can have just the verbal form. You can have just your plain old verbal, and that is a clause. And that's largely because of these things right here. They're called personal endings. Now, most verbs have personal endings. We're going to get into two special kinds of verbals. Those are participles and infinitives. But aside from those, every verbal will be what's called a finite verb. Now, a finite verb has these finite endings. A finite is the opposite of an infinitive. An infinitive has no person, and it has no number. It's just infinitive. However, a finite verb is going to have one of these endings. Rather than going into all of the details of verbal morphology, we're going to just look at some of the highlights, some of the key things that are going to help you recognize what's going on as you're reading clauses. What you need to know is this paradigm, these two sets of endings. You've got primary endings and secondary endings. A verb will only ever have one of them. This is a lot like declension in the nominals. Declension is not meaningful, it just tells you how the endings will combine with the stems. And so depending on the stem of the verb, you'll get either primary or secondary ending. So imagine if you had a word like Lego. The ending is the omega. Now, this ending is a first person singular form. It's also active. When you look at these paradigms, you've got three different things going on besides primary and secondary. You've got person, which is either first, second, or third person. You've got number, which is either singular or plural. And you've got this thing called voice, which is either active or middle passive. Active, middle passive. So those are your three properties you're looking at with these finite endings. Person, number, and voice.